Hello there. Welcome to another Seeing Clearly with me, Charlotte Giblin. And as I was just getting the camera ready, I was thinking about my opening spiel. And when I went to have coffee with a good friend a few days ago, and I sat down and she said, one take, no edits, no script. And I thought, brilliant. Not only has she seen some of my videos, but that whole kind of mantra is really sinking in. And the reason why I film in one take with no edits and no script is not so much to demonstrate a confidence with speaking and verbal flow, although there is certainly an element of that, but be mindful of the fact that I talk a lot of the time. I talk to my students a great deal of the time. I've talked for years. My family members and friends know this. This is one of my favourite forms of communication, as well as visual and written. It's one of the three big ones. And I also have a pretty constant monologue or conversation going on in my head a lot of the time. And I go over these subjects many times in my head before actually filming. And very often when I press record, what comes out of my mouth is totally different from the rehearsed text that I had in my head. But I think we often plan what we're going to say in a certain situation and then it comes out differently. And that is my point, where the point of filming with one take, no script and no edits, is to encourage us to be able to have slightly more hesitant conversations where ideas are still being formed and where we allow ourselves to perhaps forget what we wanted to say, and the risk of making mistakes, the risk of saying something we didn't quite mean, and then getting an opportunity to film another episode, or like just as you would have more than one conversation about any topic which was important with your friends or partner or family members. So there are plenty of days where I don't have confidence with words. They definitely don't come nearly so easily. And I'm in a fortunate position where I have the luxury to pick and choose when I talk to you. So it's not a case of, oh, look at me, aren't I great at ad-libbing? It's, come on, let's just try and relax a little bit about the polish that we're so used to seeing with scripted shows. And the line between what is real and what is scripted gets blurred so much. I mean, the reality shows that I must confess I quite enjoy watching, I'm never sure whether they're scripted or not. There's so many awful setups. There's got to be some kind of nudge from the producers to have some drama happening. And we have this really unnatural, stilted understanding of how other people talk and the nature of other people's conversations as demonstrated on screen. Or there's all sorts of chops and edits and a voiceover. And anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. But it did amuse me enormously that my friend was parroting back what I say. I was like, yes, this is great. Just like many of my phrases for my students had infiltrated into their minds, and they say to me that when they're painting at home or drawing, they can hear me say to them, push the light, and the jigsaw of light and shade, and all those other phrases that I love to come out with. So abstract art is harder to do than realistic art. Direct quote. I said that, and I stand by it, and I'll tell you why. It's not so much that it's technically harder, but I've spoken about this before. I feel, in my experience, for sure, the process of being able to create something abstract is so different to the technical exercise and the skills-based exercise of doing a realistic painting that I've always found abstract art harder and more challenging as a result. These days, I get far more pleasure from doing abstract art than I do from creating something realistic. Although if you follow my Instagram page or you've seen any of my YouTube shorts, most of them revolve around the work that I'll be doing at the present time, very often realistic birds, or if I'm working on a portrait, I'll be showing elements of that because I know people are interested. Because the technical side of art and the drawing side, the skills-based learning around colour mixing and painting, they are crucial elements of being a confident artist. And I remind myself of my kind of 3 stages of art combined with personal development, which is the seeing clearly. The first stage, of course, if you've seen my videos before, you can parrot this back at me as well. The stepping back, seeing something as it really is. So learning to really look, see objects, see how an image weaves together, the jigsaw of light and shade. And then the second stage is the skills and the confidence. So really understanding, developing the skills and the technical side and confidence with the technical skills that you want to use. In my case, it's always been acrylic paint. And then the third stage is letting go, which is being able to shed the judgment of others and the negative judgment that you may have hanging over yourself and those voices which say, oh, that's rubbish. Why don't you go back to painting parrots? Yeah, there's a parrot theme today, isn't there? So before I get onto this, which I am very excited about, I wanted to show you the contrast. So this is what I'm working on at the moment. And if you just went, ooh, then shame on you. No, of course, I love doing realistic work. But it's a problem-solving exercise for me. And this came about because I was working on, this is on loose canvas, as you can see. I was doing one of my new loose, fun, abstract, soft backgrounds, a lot of fluid acrylic, sponging stuff off, moving things around, just having a whale of a time. But the landscape was starting to become really quite stale. It started to look like plenty of landscapes I've done before, and I really want to keep pushing myself these days, challenging myself to do something new, which is where the abstract art and it's the difficult element of that for me comes in. But I love this top section. I love the light that's in there. And I thought, well, what can I do with this? Oh, I know, she says. I'll put a Kia right in the foreground because I've just finished that wonderful Kia bird and colonial woman commission. I did a whole video about that with the amazing Maori client and my experience there, which just gave me so much renewed hope for humanity doing that commission and telling that relatively controversial story. So I had the Kia bird in my head, but I've never done a bird this close up, and the photograph, you can see all of the lines and the feathers, and I thought, ooh, that will be new. And straight away when I'm looking at a new image, I have my artist's head on, I have my teacher's head on, and work out, well, how am I going to do that? What is the technical process for working out the feathers, the layering? I'll just bring this a little bit closer to you because it is exciting. It's exciting to be able to get that kind of detail in the eye, to be able to tell that sort of story. And this is the first time that I've overlapped 2 of my styles, woven them together. I've never done anything quite so, I've never done anything like this. I can't even finish that sentence. I've never done anything like this before. And I've definitely not done this kind of detailed feather work, but I was able to look at the photograph and work out quite clearly the areas of light and shade. And with the feathers, you can see I've done this section here. And this is actually quite an interesting point in the painting for you to see the development, where I created tiles of colour where the feathers are iridescent and reflecting the light. And then because it's easier to paint dark acrylic over light acrylic, I will then add in all of the very fine dark lines which are separating all the little pieces of feather. As you can see, I've started to do that there, but I've worked out, which is really difficult to do actually, I worked out the overall sheen, the colour that the feather bears, and then put all the tiny lines of dark shadow in between. And I'll be honest, there was a point probably about here, and I was working on this today, a few hours ago, where and I have a dialogue going on in my head most of the time while I'm painting. Either it's my teacher's voice explaining to other people what I'm doing, or I'm having a conversation with one of my imaginary friends, or I'm listening to music and trying to switch off from all of the voices and the conversations. But I did have a few moments where I said to myself, Charlotte, like, what are you doing? Why are you trying to push yourself this much technically and do something so tedious and so difficult? And I think we all have that point, don't we, in a painting, no matter what it is you're painting, where you wonder why you started it, and it's really hard to see the finish line, but you've got too far through it to stop. So you might as well keep going so you haven't wasted all that time that you've spent on the painting at the outset. And I did have a few moments of that, but then I think I got up, had a stretch, had a cup of tea, came back and thought, right, let's just get into a bit more of a flow. Instead of trying to work on some of these colours, let's start putting in some of the lines and see how that works out and how the effect works. And I got into a bit of a rhythm and I didn't mind it quite so much. But for me, it's problem solving. And I know that the realism for anybody is problem solving. It's technical problem solving. It just depends how long it takes you to solve those technical problems. And obviously that process speeds up. The more painting you do, the more confident you get with your colour mixing, with being able to see the shapes of light and shade and being able to apply the paint in a way that looks right when you've applied it. Because we can often think in our heads exactly what we imagine our hand and the brush is going to do, and our brain and our hand just aren't talking to each other in the same way that we think they will, and we can't make the marks that we imagine that we can make, and it becomes very frustrating. The technical side really holds us back from our vision, and that's the skills and the confidence section of learning. It can take a long time and it can be very, very frustrating. But with realism, and this is back to my point, realism is right or it's wrong. And although I'm creating a painting, we are creating paintings, not photographs. And I don't do photorealism. I get pretty close, but I've never really call it photorealism because you can always tell that my work is painting, is made with paint. I feel that the hand that creates and the soul that is creating the work is important. It's an important thumbprint in an artwork. I'm not really that interested in doing photorealism where you can't actually tell the difference between the photograph and the painting. For me, if you're working from a photograph, you've already got that. So why are you trying to do a copy of the photograph? You want to be able to take all of the realism, the qualities of realism from your photograph and interpret them in a painting, which is what I'm doing. If you look at the photograph next to this, they look quite different. I've been given an opportunity here. You know, I love to amp up my colours. I like to turn up the colour dial. And that is one of the elements in which my paintings are not quite real. And I love that about being able to paint and interpret things. But there are rules. There are rules to follow when you're creating something real. And that is why I find abstract painting, and always have found it, so much harder to do, because all of a sudden you don't have rules. So you're left with your own interpretation of what looks good, what's interesting. It's suddenly the structure, the lid of the box is open, and that can be far more intimidating than having really tight structure and rules within to work within. And I know, as somebody who operates very well under a structured system and have always worked well with realism because of that, that this represents almost a lack of control, a losing control, a letting go, which has never felt enormously comfortable for me. But more and more, I've been allowing myself to explore just the paint as a medium for conveying a story. And there are videos on my YouTube channel here in which I've filmed from start to finish. There's a couple of really big paintings. There's one landscape which I've done with palette knife and a lot of fluid acrylics. And there's another series I did called Push Yourself to Fail. And that painting was done initially as a landscape and then turned into a really interesting abstract painting, in my view, because it's nothing that I would ever have intended to do, and it's going with the flow of the paint and what's happening on the canvas. But I have filmed from start to finish that kind of process, and talking through all of my decisions with colour, with using different tools, and wanting to create a story within the landscape, a journey. And all of my paintings are journeys and stories of some kind. And this represents a new departure for me in my creative confidence. And that's an interesting thing for me to say when I'm talking to you, and I've done so many different videos which are clearly showing a certain level of personal confidence and creative confidence that I have. But being able to sit here really proudly with a painting that is essentially a self-portrait, after having shown you the detail of the Kia bird that I'm working on, and knowing full well that a large proportion of viewers prefer my realistic work to my abstract work. But you know what? I really don't care, in the nicest possible way. And this is such a moment to celebrate. I've become more and more confident with my own opinion or my own feelings about my work over the years. I mean, this isn't the first time that I've stopped worrying about other people's negative feedback. That change happened a long time ago. But now I can see for myself what it is that I really enjoy about this process, and why I found abstract art so hard to do in the past. So with this painting, what I did was I'm working again on loose canvas. I've just got them laid out on the floor. And you may have picked up on some of my videos before, certainly if you've read the Seeing Clearly book, that I have a very strong, intuitive, spiritual element to my personality, which actually sits pretty evenly with the logical, grounded side of me. I feel very lucky to have those two halves, and they certainly come out in my artwork, and I couldn't have a more clear demonstration of that between the structured technical exercise of the Kia and this. But this is the first time where I've really allowed my spiritual side to come through in my painting without apology and without any kind of editing afterwards. I've done lots of abstract work which I've then layered over the top of, or I've started to manipulate. But for this, I actually stood back after working on it, maybe just for 30 minutes, because it was all wet. Everything was, I was using fluid acrylics. I was moving the canvas around, so all of the paint was dripping. And then I just took a wet sponge and I was carving out areas with the sponge, and areas here with a palette knife. I took those off, and I was blowing these sections with a straw, and not thinking about any of the marks. And I struggle to use the phrase intuitive painting, because I feel like I need to be getting the patchouli burner going and putting my big hoop earrings in. I have such a harsh sense of judgment around a lot of those terms, but I can't really explain it in any other way other than getting rid of feeling like I'm being judged or watched by anybody negatively. What I felt with this was that I wanted to tell a story about myself. And so I just set my intention before the painting. I said, right, I want to take a snapshot of my soul, my spirit right now. Let's see what comes out. And put some good music on, just picked out 4 or 5 fluid acrylics that, without overthinking, squirt, squirt, squirt on the canvas, and then started moving the paint around. And I did make some quite conscious decisions, like wiping across here, and then when that was left exposed, I thought that is such a beautiful window of interest, so I left that alone. And these big blooms of paint here, instead of doing anything with those or trying to move those around, when those drips appeared, I actually just left them and thought, there was a hesitation to the way I was painting. And normally, if I'm very confident about the marks I need to make, or where I need to go next in the painting, or that section needs a bit of light, that section needs some dark. This is the technical problem solving side of myself coming through. But here, where I had I would maybe go in to make some changes, and there was like, I'm always become very conscious of my face. If I start making faces or faces, then like, no, don't do it, do it. And I'm sure everybody has little tics with their own body that they understand as a yes or a no. I'm sure, right? So my face was frowning when I was going in to want to edit, to want to make changes. And so I stood back and I just left the painting, which is so unusual for me. I want to have control over what I'm doing. I want to show that I know what I'm doing. And this is new for me in that regard. And that's why it can be so difficult knowing when to stop with abstract. Is it any good? Does anybody else think it's good? Does it speak to anyone else? And that is always a challenging series of questions when you're working on your own, when you're in a studio without any feedback. And when I'm doing these, I'm completely alone. I don't do these in class or with any other students around or anybody else in the room. This is entirely a process, a private painting process. And what I found, because I've done a whole series of these now, is that afterwards, I'm really intrigued by the story. And I love with abstract painting, especially when it's, I'm going to say semi-abstract, because there are some forms here which suggest land masses. You know, I've created horizontal lines across here and a soft smudged area there, which could really easily be interpreted as a land mass and a river or a lake because of the reflections and the much rougher marks of the palette knife. And I find that I'm fascinated by what this might be saying. And I find myself looking all around the painting and discovering different areas where, you know, the brain fills an enormous amount of detail when you have the suggestion of light and shade, which is why it's so important in realism to have your light and shade in the right place, because the brain instantly understands whether a three-dimensional shape is correct from the way that the light and shade sits together. So with this kind of painting, our brains are still trying to figure out what's going on and trying to interpret a story, trying to find some meaning in it. And straight away, you know, these shapes in the foreground, those silhouettes, is this a bird that's bending over? Is it a person? Is this a group of people waiting to cross over the river? And so if this is a snapshot of me, I mean, what an interesting self-portrait to have created, because I certainly wouldn't have deliberately painted this about myself. It's not nearly sunny enough. And that's always been disappointing for me when I've done self-portraits in the past. You may have seen the video I did about identity and the monochromatic self-portrait I did, which was so depressing because I look incredibly severe. But that's what my face looked like on that day, and probably still does when I hold a still face. And here I see a journey, I see hesitation, or I see a decision about crossing over this lake or this river, and what is it that's on the other side. There's mystery, there's excitement, there's maybe like a stage set happening. There's all kinds of dark, foreboding shapes, but there's plenty of light as well. And I think, as I said earlier, my paintings are personal journeys. My whole art practice tells the story of my personal journey, as you know, and it will tell the story of your personal journey too. All of your paintings, anything creative that you're doing, shows how you are evolving, and your attitude towards your creative evolution is also a mirror for your personal evolution. And the confidence that I have now with showing you this abstract, let's call it a soul painting of myself. And I have actually done soul paintings like this for a couple of my friends as experiments, and they found them very moving and elements which resonated with them incredibly. And they could tell relevant stories about themselves in the shapes, just as I can see relevance here about myself. So that was a really interesting experiment, and I will definitely do more of those, because that's now given me a confidence to try and explore that kind of spiritual and artistic overlap even more, which is very exciting and very new for me, but always keeping in balance those two halves of myself, which I feel is really important for me. The logical, technical, problem-solving side, which I do enjoy, but this is fun. This is a letting loose, which always terrified me, which I always found really difficult to approach. I did judge myself harshly as a result. I thought abstract art was for people who couldn't draw properly, and I didn't want to be associated with that kind of work. But now, you see, I have a totally different sense of self and understanding about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I really hope that encourages you as well with whatever kind of art you want to do, whatever kind of creative practice you're involved with, all of the things that you enjoy doing that maybe you feel you're being judged for, or you're judging yourself harshly against an old version of yourself who thought badly about what you might be doing now. It's so important to recognize where we are holding ourselves back because of old feelings that we are still carrying with us, inherited criticism and negative judgment that we're carrying like a really heavy mantle. And being able to work out how to shake that off is just a wonderful gift to be able to give yourself, and can be the most incredible, freeing experience, even if it just means, like it does for me, that I can paint some abstract art and use some gorgeous colours and tell a different type of story unapologetically and have some real fun with it. And not apologise either for working with really detailed tiny brush and doing my Kia and my birds. We can do both. Allow yourself to have many different facets and celebrate them all. So I'm going to go and have some more painting fun, and I hope that you will too. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye.